The fact is that crime here has exploded. People do not feel safe. I have a bullet hole through my living room.
Washington, D.C., capital to the United States, the richest and most powerful nation on Earth. When you think of D.C., you might conjure images of grand monuments and museums, yet the city has gone through a painful past few years. High crime, homelessness, and poverty all blight America's capital, and, like many cities across the country, people have become fed up with Democratic leadership.
These Democrat policies are failing us.
Many are now fleeing once prosperous metropolises to safer and cleaner suburbs. My name is Stephen Edgington, and I'm a journalist from the Telegraph. I travelled to Washington, D.C. to find out what has happened to the city and why. I began by meeting Isaac Smith, an ambulance driver and first responder who agreed to show me around the city.
Yeah.
So you've lived in D.C. for how long?
A little over 3 years.
Okay, so have you seen a big change in homelessness, in carjackings, in crime, and things like this in your time
Our
here?
crime is up, I want to say at least 30% since the time I moved in, just since the time I moved in. The fact is that crime here has exploded. People do not feel safe. I have a bullet hole through my living room. Don't worry, it wasn't meant for me. It was there when I moved in. You know, I hear gunshots frequently, and I live right next to an elementary school. And I'm going to take you by this elementary school. I'm going to see if it's still there, but there's a bullet hole in one of the windows. All right, let's see if they fixed this window. So you'll see that there is a sign. Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
There's the shot. I believe that this is a city, and we should take it seriously. Well, there you go. There's some stuff over there.
So there's some tents over here. So is this a classic example of DC, basically?
I mean, there's a lot of that, right?
This is the richest country in the world. This is the capital of the richest country, and one of the most famous monuments. And right next to it, we've got a tent city full of homeless people. It's just
you know, and it's, you know, like I said, we aren't investing in the shelters. We aren't, we aren't taking care of these people, is what I'd say. And it's, you know, and look, if nothing else, for appearance's sake. Somebody has driven their car straight through that.
So can you explain why you think Democrat policies has caused the rise in homelessness, has caused the rise in crime in DC?
Well, because at the end of the day, they don't believe that people have agency. They don't believe that people have free will. So people do not act. They are acted upon. Now, I'm going to tell you, drugs is a massive problem. We have hundreds of people every year who die in this city of overdoses. I spent a lot of time picking up people who had overdosed on drugs. I had one patient, I took him to the ER 3 times in one day. He'd overdose, be passed out.
Do you basically think that the sort of illegal drugs is essentially tolerated in DC?
Absolutely. It is not treated as the life-ending, life-threatening, and here's the thing, it may take decades to kill you, but, it ruins your life. You have no quality of life.
The Democrats basically say that crime happens because of poverty and because of societal issues.
Right, and don't get me wrong, that creates an environment where it can flourish. But you're not made to murder somebody. You're not made to sell drugs. And when they make that choice, they bring down the standard for the whole community, right? They drive out the businesses, so it scares off the legitimate employers. It makes it hard, right? When you get drug dealers in your neighborhood, it makes it harder for you to earn a legitimate living. The schools break down because juvenile delinquency is very, very high in DC. And part of it is that we don't seriously try to prosecute juvenile delinquents. And this has led to a rise of gangs actively recruiting children. I know many people, I know at least 3 congressional staffers that have been robbed or assaulted. And so the crime is getting so out of control. It is actually, members of Congress and their staff no longer feel safe. And they're normally the last people affected by this sort of thing. So it is actually interfering with the functioning of the legislative branch. And it's very notable that the national Democrats have not come to the aid of DC's local government, despite being in favor of statehood and theoretically in favor of DC having more self-government. They on the crime bill at least have said, no, this is getting out of control, and a minority of the Democrats worked with the Republicans to overrule it.
Let's take a step back to understand what Isaac is talking about. Last year, local DC Democrats passed major changes to the city's criminal code, which reduced punishments judges could hand out to criminals. To understand more about how the city's local politics works, I met up with Boris Rivkin, a former Republican congressional advisor who has since left DC.
There is a controversy boiling about a recent bill that the DC City Council passed to end, among other things, maximum sentencing for carjackings and other types of property crimes and similar crimes, including even some violent crimes. So there's been a surge of carjackings in D.C. It's become almost the carjacking capital of America at this point. And it's gotten so bad, the D.C. law is so out of control, even the mayor of D.C., the ultra-liberal, uber-woke mayor, vetoed it. And the D.C. City Council overrode the veto of the mayor. And seeing that, enough is enough, at least, Joe Biden couldn't make it out to East Palestine, he can't to see the southern border properly. He's, in his basement half the time in Delaware, but even he came to the conclusion that, whoa, this DC law is going too far. I got to do something about it. So Congress, the Senate, just passed a bill to overturn, to reassert its ultimate authority over DC and overturn that terrible bill.
Whilst Biden vetoed the police reforms in DC in this instance, this represents an exception to the rule. Cities across the country have seen similar spikes in violent crime and homelessness, and many blame the election of radical Democrat politicians and prosecutors. I sat down with the author and journalist Michael Schelenberger, who has written extensively about San Francisco's recent drug epidemic, to ask what has happened to American cities in the last few years.
I mean, what's happening in Washington, D.C. and in other American cities in terms of homelessness is basically the same thing that's happened in Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, Vancouver, other progressive West Coast cities, which is that you have very progressive members of the city councils, of the governing bodies of those cities that have decided that certain laws should not be enforced against people deemed to be victims. So you've seen city council members in Washington, D.C. have demanded that people be allowed to camp illegally on the sidewalks, not be required to come inside to shelters. That's even though, by the way, we know that you're 3 times more likely to die as a homeless person if you're living outside, unsheltered, as we say, than if you're inside. And it's from drug overdoses, homicides, car accidents. Some people complain about shelters. It's, they're not the most pleasant places, but they're definitely safer than living on the streets. So when you see this increase of tents around places like the train station, around subway stops, it's almost always because there's some political momentum behind not enforcing basic laws. And these laws, it's important to remind ourselves, these laws are important to both protect public safety and public health, to have these public spaces, including sidewalks and parks, available to all of us. But they're also there to protect the most vulnerable among us, particularly the so-called homeless, the vast majority of whom are suffering from untreated mental illness and drug addiction.
Washington, D.C.'s main railway hub, Union Station, became a symbol of the city's decline, with homeless people taking over much of the beautiful building. I travelled there to meet Laurie Furstenberg, who unsuccessfully attempted to run as the D.C. Republicans' mayoral candidate. Recently, we've also seen massive tent cities pop up across America. DC has also experienced this, particularly here at Union Station. So there was a lot of tents here, right, recently?
There were. I had sent some pictures that I took last year and have posted and did a story about this, about not only the tents that have been here, but when you walk around Union Station. So there were, when Stephen says tent cities, that's what it was outside. I mean, it was appalling. But inside, when you get off the train, and I'm not over-exaggerating, if you would go into the restroom, you would have people cleaning themselves, homeless people trying to clean themselves in there, homeless people sleeping in the corridors down in the train areas. You would see in the waiting areas. And then, of course, as we're going to walk around later, you're going to see all of the shops that have closed down.
So you tried to run for mayor for the Republicans. Can you discuss why you did that?
Yes, so The short of that story is, so I've been living here now almost going on 4 years. And when I moved here, I could see how irrelevant the Republican Party of DC operated with everything that's going on around our nation, with, again, our Marxist cities now. Everyone, in my opinion, needs to take a stand somehow. If you find this a problem, you need to stand up somehow. And I could not believe that the Republican Party had not run a mayoral candidate in 16 years here.
The Democrats' long-standing domination of DC politics means no one else is to blame for the debacle facing the city. Meanwhile, for tourists who come here, the image of America as a shining beacon of prosperity and freedom may be shattered.